too poor? Her words hit me like a whip. Standing in the doorway of the house I had given her, I stared at my daughter's smirk, the one that had always hidden contempt behind a fake smile. She was wearing a dress I had helped pick out, a gown worth more than my monthly rent at the time I bought this house for her. "Mom," she said, tossing her hair, "you don't even need to show up. We'll manage." Manage, like I had ever needed them. Like the thousands I had poured into her life, the furniture, the rent, the savings, the late-night calls to bail her out of every minor crisis didn't count. For a second, I felt the sting of betrayal twist in my chest, threatening to choke me. She didn't just dismiss my gift, she dismissed me. My presence, my love, my sacrifice worthless in her eyes. I clenched my hands, my nails digging into my palms as the room seemed to close in around me. Every corner of this house, every countertop, every cabinet, every detail reminded me that this home, my money, my choices, my sweat, had been treated like a charity project. And now? She had the audacity to lecture me on my poverty. A soft voice from behind her startled me. "Darling, let's focus on the reception," her fiancé said. He didn't even glance at me. No acknowledgement, no thanks, just a nod to the golden cage I had built for them. I realized something then, in that instant. I had been invisible in my own generosity. I stepped back, drawing a deep breath, feeling a cold clarity wash over me. This wasn't just a slight, it was a challenge, a gauntlet thrown at my feet. I was tired of being dismissed, tired of being the invisible bank behind their fantasies. My gift? It would be unforgettable. And it would teach her exactly who had been paying for every illusion of grandeur in her life. If you want to know how I turned this humiliation into justice, make sure you're subscribed and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I closed the door behind me and leaned against the polished wood, letting memories wash over me like a slow tide. Years ago, before she even knew what responsibility meant, I had sold my small but cozy apartment to help her and her father start their lives. Every dollar I saved from decades of careful budgeting, every painstaking sacrifice gone, given freely, unquestioned. I remembered the nights I skipped dinner so she could have a new outfit for school, the mornings I woke before the sun to prepare her favorite breakfast before rushing off to work. I had nursed her through fevers, consoled her broken hearts, and wiped away tears that weren't mine. Every sacrifice had been fueled by unconditional love, the kind that doesn't calculate or complain. When I think back, I can still feel the sting of emptiness in my hands when I handed over the check for her first rent, the same rent I had painstakingly saved to afford my own small comforts. I had chosen to invest in her future instead of indulging in my own life. The thought that she could call me too poor while she thrived on what I had built made my chest tighten with a mixture of sorrow and disbelief. And yet, even as I gave everything, I never asked for recognition. I didn't need praise. I wanted only to see her succeed, to see her happiness bloom. That had been enough. Until today, until the words that cut deeper than any knife. Too poor to give her a wedding gift. I realized in that cold moment of betrayal that love alone hadn't been enough to secure her respect. It had been taken for granted, dismissed as if my sacrifices were invisible. But the quiet strength I had gathered over the years, the lessons of resilience, patience, and strategy were still within me. And now, they would be the tools I used to turn the tables. I touched the edges of the old checkbook, the worn pages a testament to decades of careful giving. The house, the savings, the countless favors they had all been given with love. But love, it seemed, could be a weapon too, when wielded with intelligence and resolve. In that moment, I whispered to myself, "It's time they learn what it really means to underestimate me." As I sat alone in the quiet house I had built for her, another wave of memories crashed over me. The countless evenings I gave up with friends to attend parent-teacher meetings, the weekends spent driving her to piano lessons, soccer games, and summer camps. Each hour I sacrificed was an hour I could have spent nurturing my own dreams, exploring passions I'd shelved for decades. I remembered the sleepless nights during her illnesses, when she would wake crying from nightmares. I had held her trembling hands and whispered courage, even when my own heart ached from exhaustion. Every tear I wiped away, every sigh I comforted, had been invisible labor, the labor of a mother who gave her all without hesitation. Then there were the birthdays I quietly funded, the holidays I meticulously planned, ensuring she felt celebrated, adored, loved. I had gone without so that she could have the joy I wished for her. I had imagined that one day she would understand the depth of my devotion. Instead, today, her words reminded me she had only seen what I gave, never the cost of giving it. I thought of the sacrifices that weren't tangible, the conversations I had listened to when she felt hurt, the fears I absorbed in silence, the advice I offered only when asked, the comfort I provided when life's troubles overwhelmed her. I had been her invisible shield, taking blows in her place, weathering storms she didn't know existed. And yet, she now dismissed me as too poor. Too poor. I had given her everything, and still, it was never enough. The realization stung, sharper than any financial loss. Love, devotion, and years of labor had been taken for granted, turned into a backdrop for her entitlement. But those memories, though painful, were not just reminders of loss, they were proof of my strength. Strength that had been tested, honed, and preserved for this moment. The moment when her arrogance and disregard would meet the reality she never expected, that the mother she thought powerless had always held the cards. I clenched my fists, feeling a cold, steady determination fill me. I had been invisible for too long, and now my presence, my power, my justice would be unforgettable. Watching her laugh in the living room, oblivious to my presence, I began to understand why she had become so careless with her words. My daughter, raised with privilege and entitlement, had never truly faced consequences. She believed the world owed her and that I existed only to finance her whims. Every gift, every favor, every loan had reinforced a distorted perception that she could demand without gratitude, that my sacrifices were limitless. Her fiancé, too, shared the same arrogance, quietly feeding off her confidence. He never looked at me as a human being, only as a resource, a stepping stone toward his vision of a perfect life. He smiled, nodded, and reinforced her sense of superiority, carefully avoiding any recognition of my effort or presence. Their motivations weren't born purely of malice. They were fueled by complacency, entitlement, and a calculated convenience. She had grown dependent on my generosity, mistaking it for weakness. He had learned that I could be ignored, my voice discounted, my boundaries tested without consequence. And together, they had built a bubble of arrogance, confident that my existence posed no real threat to their plans. Their motivations were clear: self-interest, a desire for control, and the assumption that I would always be the invisible benefactor. Yet beneath their vanity and greed, there was also fear, a subtle, unrecognized fear. I could see it in the way they carefully curated their social image, how she constantly sought approval from her peers, and how he hesitated when making decisions without her guidance. They thrived on the illusion of power, not realizing that true authority had always been in my hands, quiet, patient, and unseen. The realization sparked a quiet, icy smile. They were arrogant, yes, but naive. And naivete can be a mother's greatest weapon. Their entitlement, their arrogance, their dismissive cruelty, all of it would feed the strategy I had been shaping silently, meticulously, over months of observation. I whispered to myself, standing in the shadows of the kitchen I had built for them, "You've underestimated me for the last time." The following week, their disregard escalated in ways I had silently anticipated. My daughter and her fiancé started redecorating the living room without asking, replacing furniture I had painstakingly chosen. The granite countertops, the custom cabinets, everything I had funded, everything I had touched was being treated as if it belonged to them alone. They invited friends over, laughing loudly, ignoring my presence entirely. My attempts to speak, to remind them politely of my contributions, were met with rolled eyes and curt dismissals. "Mom, just stay out of it," she said one evening, her voice sharp, cutting through the air like glass. Her fiancé chimed in, "We know what we're doing, don't stress over it." Even small gestures of gratitude were absent. Birthdays passed without acknowledgement. Holidays were celebrated without me, despite my constant financial and emotional support over the years. Every slight, intentional or careless, was a needle in the fabric of my patience. Their behavior was a test of boundaries, and they had assumed I would fail. I watched quietly, cataloging every insult, every act of erasure. They weren't just ignoring me, they were actively trying to diminish my presence, to assert their control over the life I had built for them. Each incident added fuel to the quiet fire that had been growing inside me. But as their arrogance grew, so did my clarity. I began to see the patterns, moments when they were careless, gaps in their planning, the overconfidence that blinded them to reality. I realized that escalation was not just cruelty, it was an invitation. They had shown their hand, revealing their weaknesses, and now the stage was set for me to act. I could feel the shift within me. The anger, the hurt, the betrayal. It was no longer a cloud of despair. It was a focused, measured determination. I knew their next moves would come easily, but I was ready. Each act of cruelty was a clue, each dismissive word a map to their downfall. And I whispered to myself, a cold certainty settling in my chest, "Let's see how far your arrogance carries you before it collapses under its own weight." I stood in the hallway that had once been a symbol of my generosity, staring at the walls lined with memories of birthdays, holidays, and family milestones. For months, I had tolerated their arrogance, their dismissals, their casual cruelty. But today, as my daughter sneered at my suggestion to fix a minor plumbing issue, "Mom, really, just leave it. We can handle it ourselves," something inside me snapped. It wasn't anger in the chaotic sense, not tears or shouting. It was a calm, piercing clarity. All the small indignities, all the years of silent endurance, had built up to a single, undeniable truth. I would no longer be invisible. I would no longer allow them to treat my sacrifices as inconsequential. I thought of every night I had skipped, every dollar I had given, every moment I had spent bending to their convenience. I realized I was not powerless. I had been strategically patient. Every document I signed, every transfer I authorized, every check I wrote had quietly kept me in the position to act. And now, the time had come. I clenched my fists, feeling the latent strength I had always possessed but never fully used. I knew I had resources they hadn't considered: legal documents, ownership stakes, and a carefully cultivated awareness of their overconfidence. They thought they had control. They thought I was helpless. Not anymore. I took a deep breath, feeling a new energy surge through me, a mixture of resolve, strategy, and justice. My lips curved into a quiet, almost imperceptible smile. It was not malice. It was preparation, the calm before the storm. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to imagine the future differently, one where they could no longer dismiss me, no longer undermine me, no longer take what I had built as a given. The gears of a long-planned strategy clicked into place in my mind. I could see the sequence, the steps, the inevitability of it all. And I whispered to the empty hallway, my voice steady, unwavering, "You wanted me gone? Fine, but I will take everything with me that you thought was yours, and you will finally learn who holds the power." Sitting quietly in the study, I opened the drawer where I had kept the paperwork for the house documents no one had bothered to read, forms they had neglected to sign properly, and legal contracts that quietly placed me in control. For years I had waited, careful not to reveal that the power to change everything had always been in my hands. The house I had given her, the home she now flaunted as if it were hers alone, was legally 35% mine. A co-owner, a silent architect of their entire lifestyle, whose stake had been overlooked because they assumed generosity meant weakness. Amanda never signed the acknowledgement forms I had sent multiple times, and they had ignored every follow-up. In their arrogance, they had made a fatal error. I ran my fingers over the papers, the mortgage agreement listing me as co-borrower, the deed noting my ownership, and the letters from my lawyer confirming that my gift was actually a binding legal stake. Each sheet was a silent weapon, dormant until now. I realized that every careless action, every dismissal of my presence, had brought me closer to this moment of absolute leverage. It wasn't just the legal documents. I had evidence too. Emails, text messages, even casual voicemails revealing their contempt, their entitlement, their underestimation of me. Every insult, every casual dismissal was a breadcrumb leading straight to the perfect, undeniable trap. I could see the possibilities unfurling: a notice of intent to sell, a forced buyout, a recalculation of ownership that would turn their sense of security into panic. And the best part? They had no clue. Not yet. They assumed the house, the lifestyle, even my patience were theirs to exploit. I smiled quietly, letting the calm certainty of my position sink in. The weapon was ready. All that remained was timing, knowing when to strike, so that the full weight of their arrogance would collapse under the truth they had ignored for so long. I whispered to myself, the words barely audible, "You thought I was powerless. Let's see what happens when you realize I hold all the cards." Early the next morning, I drove past the house I had gifted, the one they now treated as if it were entirely theirs. The sunlight glinted off the windows, highlighting the careless luxury they had taken for granted. I felt no anger, only a calculated calm. Today, the first move would be made. I called my lawyer, Margaret, her voice crisp and professional on the other end of the line. "Margaret, it's time," I said. "Prepare the notice of intent to sell. We start quietly, nothing sudden that alerts them yet." Margaret typed rapidly, confirming every detail. She knew the stakes. This wasn't impulsive, it was precise, deliberate, and perfectly legal. My 35% stake gave me the authority. They assumed generosity meant I wouldn't act. That assumption was their greatest vulnerability. The plan was simple for now. Send the initial legal notice to the title company, marking the first official step toward reclaiming control. I wanted to move without confrontation, let them feel safe, smug, until the moment the reality hit. They would read the letters, see my ownership, and feel the panic of a world they thought was theirs crumbling. Driving home, I envisioned their reactions. Confusion, denial, fear. Every laugh, every dismissive remark they had directed at me came back in slow motion. They believed they could manipulate me, ignore me, and trample on my generosity. They didn't realize I had been observing, calculating, and waiting for the perfect moment to shift the balance. Back in my quiet kitchen, I poured myself a cup of tea and let the calmness settle. This was not revenge fueled by emotion, it was justice orchestrated with precision. The first move was only the beginning. Every step from here would be deliberate, each one escalating their awareness of the power they had underestimated. I smiled faintly and whispered, almost to myself, "This is just the opening act. They haven't seen anything yet." For the next few days, I moved quietly, almost invisibly. I didn't call, didn't confront, didn't show any sign of anger. But the letters I had authorized, the notices quietly sent, began to ripple through their carefully constructed world. Small signs emerged, a surprised glance from the mail carrier, a hesitation in the banker's voice when confirming account details. They were still smug, still believing that I had no real power over them. My daughter continued to throw parties, flaunt her lifestyle, and ignore me completely. Her fiancé remained confident, thinking every transaction, every decision, every minute of chaos had nothing to do with me. But under the surface, cracks had begun to form. I noticed it when she checked her email one morning, a fleeting expression crossing her face. Surprise, panic, disbelief. Her fingers trembled slightly as she scrolled through the notice. But she quickly masked it with a laugh, brushing it off in front of her fiancé. They were so close to seeing the first glimpse of reality, and yet still blinded by their own arrogance. I kept up appearances, volunteering at the local community center, running errands, living as if nothing had changed. But inside, every heartbeat carried a quiet thrill. They were about to discover that the generosity they had exploited was also the foundation of their undoing. The suspense wasn't just mine, it was theirs too. Each casual glance at the mailbox, each small discrepancy, each whispered phone call among their friends and family slowly built the tension. They had no idea that every random event had been orchestrated, every document had been prepared, every small moment was part of a larger pattern. And I whispered under my breath, savoring the anticipation, "Just wait. Soon, the world you thought you controlled will begin to unravel." The day came when I finally let a subtle ripple reach them. I didn't confront her. I didn't shout or wave legal papers in her face. Instead, I let the house whisper its own truth. A delivery arrived that morning, addressed to my daughter, with a certified notice from the title company confirming the sale proceedings of the house. She opened it in front of her fiancé, expecting some minor bureaucratic detail. Her eyes widened, disbelief coloring her carefully curated composure. "Mom, what is this?" she finally stammered, voice tight, as her fiancé hovered, confused and pale. I leaned against the doorway, calm as always. Just a little reminder that things aren't always as simple as they seem. For a brief moment, I saw at the first crack in their confidence. The arrogant smiles faded. They were starting to realize that I had been far from powerless. That the house, the money, the life they had taken for granted had never been theirs to control completely. It wasn't full revenge yet. It was a strategic unveiling, a taste of the storm to come. Their panic was subtle, restrained, but unmistakable. The control they assumed they had over me and over their own future was now being questioned. I watched them silently, letting the tension build. They didn't yet understand the full extent of my power, and that was exactly how I wanted it. The seeds of anxiety had been planted, and I would water them carefully. What do you think they'll do next? Let me know your predictions in the comments below, and if you're finding strength in this story, please hit that like button to support the channel. By the end of the week, the first real signs of panic began to show. My daughter, who had once walked through life with an air of unshakable confidence, now hesitated at every decision. She double-checked emails, reread contracts, and glanced nervously at her fiancé, who had begun pacing, muttering under his breath about unexpected complications. Their little fortress of arrogance, built on years of assuming my generosity was infinite, started to crumble. They whispered behind closed doors, their conversations tinged with fear and doubt. Each day, I watched subtle mistakes emerge, misplaced keys, overlooked notices, even the tiniest slips that would have been impossible in their previous unchallenged state. I could feel it, the satisfaction of watching their once controlled world slowly unravel. The veneer of control was cracking. She began to second-guess herself, asking questions I had never been asked before. The fiancé, usually so commanding, now sought reassurance, a sign that the plan I had set in motion was working exactly as intended. I maintained my calm, pretending to go about my daily routine, all the while letting their paranoia grow. I knew the more they doubted themselves and each other, the more power I had. Their world, built on entitlement and arrogance, was beginning to twist into chaos without me lifting a finger beyond the first subtle nudge. A small smile curved across my face. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The cracks had appeared. The foundation they thought unshakable was weakening. And soon, those doubts would grow into mistakes, and those mistakes would pave the way for their ultimate downfall. I whispered softly to myself, savoring the suspense. The first seeds of reckoning have been planted, and they have no idea who's watering them. I started dropping subtle hints, almost like whispers in the wind, that made them question every step they took. A casual mention of important documents left in the study, a phone call to their bank, confirming ownership percentages, little nudges that seeded doubt and paranoia. My daughter began to second-guess herself. Every glance at her fiancé became a silent accusation. Did you check everything? Did you read that notice properly? The tension between them, once playful and confident, grew taut. Their whispered arguments, once hidden, now echoed through the house in hushed, frustrated tones. Even their friends began to notice. Invitations were declined with excuses, messages went unanswered. Fear and uncertainty had begun to corrode the arrogance they had flaunted so openly. Every small misstep they made felt amplified, like a crack in a dam about to burst. I stayed calm, sipping my tea in the kitchen, watching from a distance. My presence was minimal, almost imperceptible, yet my influence was undeniable. Each subtle intervention, an email left unopened, a hint of a call from the lawyer, a question about deadlines forced them into defensive positions. They were exhausting themselves, unraveling under their own weight, and I hadn't even revealed my full power yet. The more they overthought, the more mistakes they made. Every decision was now filtered through fear and doubt, and their once solid confidence was crumbling. I whispered to myself, a cold satisfaction settling in my chest. They think they are controlling the game, but it's me who sets the rules. By midweek, the tension had reached its peak. My daughter's sharp confidence was replaced with frantic whispers and panicked glances. She and her fiancé were no longer speaking in unison. They were stumbling over excuses, questioning each other in private, trying to figure out who had mismanaged what. Late one evening, she approached me, her voice suddenly soft and pleading. "Mom, we didn't mean any of it. Please, can we talk?" Her eyes, once so full of scorn, were now wide with anxiety. Her fiancé hovered behind, trying to nod reassuringly, but his hands betrayed his nervousness. I didn't rush to respond. Their desperation only confirmed what I already knew. They were grasping at straws. They had underestimated me for years, and now they were realizing the cost of their arrogance. Their previous control, built on entitlement and disregard, was crumbling, leaving them exposed. Small concessions came next. She offered apologies, small and hesitant. He suggested repayments, trying to negotiate timelines and partial solutions. Their words sounded hollow, rehearsed, and desperate. They weren't genuine attempts at reconciliation, they were survival instincts, a recognition that the rules of the game had changed. I stayed calm, watching the layers of their panic unfold. Every plea, every attempt to reclaim control, only deepened their entanglement in the situation they had ignored for too long. The more they scrambled, the more clearly I saw the consequences of their actions reflected back at them. And I whispered quietly, savoring the power of the moment, "This is your world, built on my generosity, unraveling because you thought it would always be free." That morning I made my move. Calm, deliberate, irreversible. I signed the eviction notice, the culmination of months of observation, patience, and quiet strategy. My hands didn't shake, my heart didn't race, only a cold clarity guided me. This was the line they had crossed too many times, the boundary they had ignored for years. I called my lawyer, Margaret, and instructed her to file it immediately. "No delays, no exceptions. Deliver it to their door today," I said. Margaret's voice was steady, knowing the significance of the moment. I didn't need her encouragement. I had prepared for this for months. As I walked through the house I had once given them, I noticed every detail, my fingerprints on the cabinets, my contributions in every corner. Every gesture of my past generosity now became a silent testament to their entitlement and my power. This house, which they had treated as theirs, would now be the stage of their reckoning. I didn't gloat. I didn't announce my presence. I simply allowed the legal machinery to take over. The letters were delivered, notices posted. The clock ticked with the inevitability of justice. For the first time, they were confronted not by my words, not by confrontation, but by facts they could not ignore. I knew there would be panic, disbelief, and perhaps attempts at negotiation, but nothing would reverse this action. Every option they once had to manipulate or delay had evaporated. I had taken the step that could not be undone, and in doing so reclaimed the authority they had dismissed for too long. Leaning against the hallway wall, I whispered to myself, steady and unwavering, "This is it. No turning back. You will learn the cost of taking what was never yours." By late afternoon they arrived home, expecting the usual routine, a house that belonged to them, a mother who would quietly tolerate their arrogance. Instead, they were met with a crisp envelope taped to the front door. My daughter's eyes widened as she recognized the official seal. Her fiancé leaned in, squinting at the text, disbelief and panic spreading across his face. I stepped forward from the shadows of the porch, calm and composed. "I see you found my gift," I said, letting my voice carry just enough weight to unsettle them. She stammered, "Mom, what is this?" Her fiancé fumbled for words, but they weren't sure how to speak to the truth they hadn't expected. I took a slow step closer. "This house, the one you've been treating as yours, has rules I never needed to enforce until now. You thought I was powerless. You thought my sacrifices were invisible. But every document, every check, every word I've signed has been a foundation for this moment." Their faces paled. Panic replaced arrogance. The realization that I had legal power, authority, and control hit them hard. Every casual dismissal, every insult, every act of ingratitude was now reflected back at them through the undeniable weight of facts. I didn't yell. I didn't raise my voice. I simply allowed the confrontation to exist as a quiet, unavoidable truth. "And Mordas, you will vacate the premises," I said evenly. "You have 30 days to arrange your affairs. The rest is up to the law." For the first time, they were forced to see me not as a source of money, not as an invisible helper, but as a woman who had observed, planned, and executed justice with patience and precision. They were trapped not by anger, but by the undeniable consequences of their own choices. I whispered to myself, savoring the calm, "You wanted me gone. Fine. But you underestimated the cost of taking my generosity for granted." I stood in the living room, the sunlight streaming through the windows, catching the dust motes in a golden haze. My daughter and her fiancé were frozen in place, staring at me as if they were seeing me for the first time. I held up the envelope containing the eviction notice, letting it dangle between us like a pendulum of inevitability. "This house," I said slowly, deliberately, "the one you've been living in and flaunting as your own, has never been entirely yours." "Alle." Her face paled, her smirk evaporated, replaced by fear. "What do you mean, Mom?" she whispered. I took a deep breath. "Every dollar I contributed, every check I wrote, every contract you ignored was not merely generosity. Legally, I am a co-owner of this house, 35%. That's right, the house is partially mine, and I have exercised my rights." Her fiancé's jaw dropped. You can do that?" "I can," I replied. "And I have. That's what the notice represents. 35% of your home is mine to reclaim, and the law is on my side. Your ignorance of paperwork, your arrogance in assuming my passivity, those are your undoing. I have given you every opportunity to respect what was mine, and you refused. This is the consequence." I let the weight of silence sink in, watching as panic flickered across their faces. They hadn't considered that I had prepared for this moment, that every act of dismissal, every insult, every claim of my poverty had been meticulously documented, preserved, and ready to be leveraged. "You believed I was powerless," I continued, calm, measured. "But every move you made, every laugh at my expense, only ensured I would have the upper hand when the time came. And now, the time has come." I paused, letting the truth resonate fully. Their sense of control had evaporated. Their arrogance, their entitlement, their sense of security all shattered in the quiet precision of my revelation. And softly, I added, almost to myself, "Welcome to reality." The following days were chaos for them. My daughter paced the house incessantly, her phone glued to her hand, calling anyone she thought could help. Her fiancé tried to negotiate, promise, and placate, but every attempt collided with the reality I had meticulously set in motion. The eviction notice was final, the legal documentation airtight, and the timeline unforgiving. I watched silently from the periphery, feeling a cold satisfaction. Every financial misstep, every entitlement-driven expectation they had cultivated over years, now became a chain constricting them. Friends whispered behind closed doors about their panic. Neighbors noticed the abrupt shift in their demeanor, the hurried conversations, the visible stress where there had once been confidence. They realized too late that I had been more than a giver. I had been a strategist. Every loan, every gift, every compromise had been calculated, and every one of their assumptions had been used against them. The house, which they had assumed to be a permanent playground, had transformed into a battlefield where their ignorance and arrogance dictated their defeat. My daughter's voice, once commanding and dismissive, trembled now. "Mom, please. Can we pay you? Can we make this right?" Her pleas were hollow, desperate, and entirely reactive. Her fiancé's hands shook as he reviewed mortgage statements and tried to cobble together a plan. They had underestimated me. They had assumed my patience was weakness. And now, they were learning that every gift comes with a boundary, and every boundary has consequences. I felt a strange mix of vindication and relief. This wasn't about cruelty, it was about accountability. Every year of dismissal, every insult to my worth, every act of entitlement had led to this moment. Justice wasn't loud or vindictive. It was precise, undeniable, and utterly satisfying. And quietly, in the stillness of my own home, I whispered to myself, "This is what happens when you treat generosity as weakness. Welcome to the consequences." The house was silent now, but the silence was heavy with tension. My daughter sat on the couch, head in her hands, staring blankly at the walls she had once considered hers. Her fiancé paced the room, phone calls unanswered, emails ignored, scrambling for solutions that would never fully restore their sense of security. The neighbors whispered, the friends called, but none could reverse the inevitable. Their panic and frustration were mirrored in every glance, every hesitant movement. The life they had taken for granted, paid for with my sacrifices, was no longer a certainty. Their once bold confidence had crumbled, leaving only fear and regret in its place. I walked through the empty rooms, tracing my hands over the surfaces I had chosen, over the counters, the floors, the spaces I had nurtured. Everything I had given, everything I had built, was now both a reminder and a shield. They had learned, in the harshest way possible, that entitlement without gratitude carries consequences. From the hallway, I observed them quietly. There was no pleading that could undo the reality. Their attempts at negotiation were futile, their apologies hollow. They had gambled on my passivity and lost. For the first time in years, I felt the calm of justice served, not in anger, but in the undeniable truth of the situation. I took a deep breath, letting the quiet satisfaction wash over me. Their world, built on assumptions and arrogance, had shifted. And in that shift, I reclaimed not only the house but the respect and boundaries that had been absent for far too long. And softly to myself, the chaos is theirs now. The silence is mine. Months later, I sat on the balcony of my new apartment, a quiet two-bedroom haven I had chosen for myself, far from the chaos of entitlement and disregard. The city stretched below me, lights twinkling like reminders of the life I had finally reclaimed. No one was rushing in to demand money, no one was ignoring my presence while living off my labor, and no one assumed my generosity was infinite. I had sold the house after the eviction notice, using the proceeds to secure a comfortable and independent life. Half went into investments for my future, and the other half for simple pleasures I had denied myself for decades. Travel, art classes, and quiet afternoons spent with friends who truly valued me. The sense of freedom was intoxicating, a joy I hadn't felt in years. Every day, I woke up for myself. I cooked what I wanted, painted what inspired me, and wandered through the city with a lightness in my step. Occasionally, memories of the confrontation or the letters would cross my mind, but they no longer carried anger, only a sense of clarity and accomplishment. I had set boundaries, enforced respect, and learned that true love and care cannot be bought. Even my daughter and her fiancé had learned the hard lesson of accountability. Rumors reached me that they struggled to adjust to living within their means, no longer able to take my support for granted. While I felt no joy in their discomfort, there was satisfaction in knowing that their actions had consequences, and that I had acted with fairness, precision, and justice. I took a deep breath, the cool evening air filling my lungs. Life was simple, peaceful, and wholly mine. The past could no longer dictate my present. I had discovered that independence, self-respect, and clarity were more valuable than any material gift I could give, and that sometimes the greatest gift to someone who undervalues you is to reclaim your own power. As the sun set over my balcony, painting the sky in shades of gold and violet, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. Every betrayal, every dismissal, every insult had carved lessons into my heart. I had learned that love and generosity, while boundless, must be matched with respect. When respect is denied, boundaries are not only necessary, they are life-saving. I thought of my daughter, the house, the years of sacrifice. I realized that the greatest gift I had given her was not money or property, it was the lesson that every action has consequences, and that entitlement cannot thrive without accountability. By standing firm, I had preserved my dignity, my freedom, and my peace of mind. Life had opened a new chapter for me. I had traveled, met new friends who valued me for who I was, and embraced hobbies and passions I had long deferred. I had reclaimed the joy and autonomy that had been overshadowed by obligation and manipulation. For the first time in decades, I felt fully alive, valued for myself, not my wallet. To anyone watching, remember this: protecting your boundaries, asserting your worth, and standing up for yourself is not cruelty, it is self-respect. Love cannot be coerced, and respect cannot be assumed. Sometimes, the hardest, most empowering act of love is to say, I will no longer be taken for granted. Thank you for walking this journey with me. If my story resonated with you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of strength and justice. What lesson did you take away from this? I'd love to read your thoughts below.